She never imagined her life would be split in two by a single moment. One second, she was a loving wife preparing for motherhood. The next, she was holding 3 beautiful babies in her arms, babies who didn't look anything like her, or her husband. Their skin was dark, their curls were tight, and the silence in the delivery room, deafening. That day, the world didn't just change for her, it shattered. How do you defend your truth when your own husband looks at you like a stranger? How do you hold your babies tight when the people who should protect you call them a mistake? Have you ever been blamed for something you didn't do, just because of how things looked? This is the story of Elena Bradford, a white woman from rural Oregon, and the 3 black triplets who would both break and rebuild her life. But more than that, it's the story of how lies buried in past generations come roaring back, how racism doesn't always scream. It whispers in hospital corridors, family kitchens, and courtroom hallways, and how sometimes the people you trust the most become the ones who doubt you the fastest. Would you stay and fight for your truth? Or would you walk away from the life you once built, with nothing but your babies in your arms and a storm in your heart? Let me tell you what happened to Elena. Because if it had been you on that hospital bed, you'd want the world to know the truth too. Before the hospital lights and the cruel stares, before she was called a liar by the man who once promised her forever, Elena Bradford was just a girl with a quiet voice and too much heart. She met Michael Ward when she was 16. He was everything she wasn't: loud, charming, fearless. He had that kind of messy smile that made girls forgive things they shouldn't. And Elena? She forgave early. They met in high school, in a town where everybody knew everybody's family, income, and GPA. Michael was the local golden boy, varsity athlete, son of a respected contractor. Elena was the daughter of a librarian and a mechanic. Polite, shy, always watching the world from just behind her bangs. But Michael saw her. He really saw her. Or at least, that's what she believed. Their love began in the spaces between lunch periods, stolen notes in lockers, and soft walks by the lake behind their school. And by the time they were in college together, Michael studying architecture, Elena nursing, they were already known as the couple who'd make it, who'd get married before 25, who'd have beautiful kids, who'd prove that high school sweethearts could survive the world. But love doesn't survive off of promises alone. Sophomore year, everything changed. It started with Michael being busy, then distracted, then defensive. Then one day, Elena opened his phone while he was in the shower. She wasn't the type, not the kind to snoop. But when someone you love becomes someone you don't recognize, curiosity turns into survival. And there it was. Texts, late-night conversations, pictures she would never forget. The girl's name was Riley. She was in Michael's drafting class. Pretty, confident, the type of girl who never had to chase anyone because people always came to her. When Elena confronted him, he didn't deny it. He didn't lie. But somehow, that made it worse. "I didn't mean to," he said. "It just happened. You and we've been together so long, I don't even know who I am anymore." He cried. She did too. But it was the kind of crying that doesn't heal. It just breaks things louder. That night, she walked 4 miles back to her dorm in the rain. No coat, no umbrella. Just a storm on the outside to match the one unraveling inside her. She didn't sleep that night, or the night after. And when the midterms came, she failed 2 of them. She stopped showing up to campus parties. Her roommate tried to help, but what do you say to someone who trusted their whole future to the wrong person? It was during one of those hollow days that she ran into Jalen Rivers. Jalen wasn't like Michael. He didn't steal attention when he entered a room. He was soft-spoken, deeply observant. The kind of guy who remembered what book you mentioned liking 3 weeks ago and showed up with it the next day. He was studying child psychology. He believed in gentle words, late-night coffees, and never raising your voice, even when you wanted to scream. They'd known each other from a freshman elective. He'd always said hello, always opened the library door for her. But after the breakup, his hellos turned into, "Are you okay?" His small talk turned into listening. And Elena? She let herself fall into that quiet comfort. At first, it was just coffee. Then, coffee turned into study sessions. Then study sessions turned into silence on the dorm couch, her head on his shoulder, his fingers nervously brushing hers. He never asked her for more. He never rushed her. He never pushed the moment. But slowly, something shifted. She began to smile again. Not the big kind, just the kind that makes your cheeks twitch and your chest loosen for a second. She started laughing at the little things again, at Jalen's dumb puns and terrible microwave meals. And though she never said it aloud, being around him made her feel safe. Not excited, not breathless, but safe, like a place she could land when the world got too loud. Still, Michael haunted her. Not in person. He moved on, moved out, stopped calling. But his memory lingered like perfume on a pillow you forgot to wash. One evening, sitting on a park bench with Jalen, she stared at a tree swaying in the wind and whispered, "I don't think I know how to be loved anymore, not without flinching." Jalen didn't speak right away. He just placed his hand gently over hers and said, "You don't have to know. You just have to be. I'll wait." And he did. For weeks. For months. Elena thought maybe, just maybe, this was her second chance. Maybe she didn't need fireworks. Maybe she just needed peace. But peace, as it turns out, isn't always loud enough to drown out ghosts. Because as time moved forward and graduation approached, a message appeared in her inbox. Michael. He'd moved to Portland. He was working with a real firm now. He'd grown up. He'd made mistakes. And he was wondering, could they talk? Elena stared at the message for over an hour. She didn't reply. Not that day, not the next. But the seed was planted. And some seeds, even buried deep, find their way to the surface. She told herself she wouldn't reply. She told herself 1,000 times, but sometimes silence feels heavier than words. 3 days after reading Michael's message, Elena typed 5 letters. Okay. They met at a small cafe just off campus. The kind with uneven wooden chairs and mismatched mugs. The kind where no one noticed when you sat in silence. Just being. Michael looked older. Not dramatically, but enough. His hair was shorter, his shirt tucked in, his voice lower, calmer, almost like guilt had matured him. "Elena," he said softly, like he was afraid the name might break in his mouth. She nodded once. "Michael?" They didn't hug. She didn't smile. He didn't expect her to. For the first few minutes, the air was thick with questions neither of them had the courage to ask. "I'm not here to make excuses," Michael said, his hand curled around a chipped ceramic mug. "I know what I did, and I know what I lost." Elena looked out the window. A child was chasing pigeons on the sidewalk, laughing as feathers danced. She wished, briefly, that life could be that simple again. "I loved you," she said flatly. "You threw that away." "I know." He swallowed hard. "I've been in therapy. I'm working on myself. That's not your problem anymore, but I needed you to know I've changed." Changed. Such a soft word for a storm. "What do you want, Michael?" she finally asked. He hesitated. "I want to try again. Not now, not fast, just someday. I wanted to look you in the eye and tell you that you were never the problem. I was, and I see that now." Elena didn't answer. She stood up, thanked him, and walked out without a word. But that wasn't the end. Over the next few weeks, he kept showing up. Not in grand gestures, not with flowers or cliches. Just presence. He sent her articles he knew she'd like. He asked how her final exams were going. He texted once just to say, "You crossed my mind today. Hope your heart is light." And slowly, against every instinct she'd sharpened to survive, Elena began to soften. Jalen noticed. He didn't ask. He didn't confront. But she could feel it in the way his laughter faded when Michael's name came up. The way he grew quiet during their conversations, like waiting for a goodbye that hadn't been spoken yet. One evening, while packing books for a study group, Jalen looked at her and said, "Do you still love him?" Elena froze. "I don't know," she whispered. Jalen nodded. "That's your answer." He didn't make a scene. He didn't accuse. But 2 weeks later, he gently pulled away. Stopped texting first. stopped waiting after class. And just like that, the boy who helped mend her became part of the past she never planned to revisit. Michael waited, not impatiently, not loudly. He let her come to him, at her own pace. By the time graduation rolled around, they were talking regularly, sharing memories, even laughing again. And one afternoon, on the lawn behind campus, he took her hand. "Elena," he said, voice trembling, "I still love you, but I want to do it right this time. I want to build something that doesn't collapse the first time it rains." She looked at him for a long moment. And then she nodded. The next few years felt almost surreal. Michael got a job at an eco-design firm. Elena passed her nursing boards and started work at a local clinic. They moved into a small apartment near the river, creaky floors, yellow walls, big dreams. There were good days. There were long walks and quiet mornings. There was forgiveness, slow, clumsy, but real. They weren't perfect, but they were trying. And sometimes that was enough. They took weekend trips. They danced in the kitchen. They cried during sad movies. They planned a future, one step at a time. And when Michael proposed on a rainy Tuesday in their living room with a cheap silver ring and teary eyes, Elena said yes, not because it was fairy tale perfect, but because she believed people could grow, because she wanted to believe in second chances. They married quietly in a garden behind her aunt's house. 30 guests, homemade cake, no extravagance, just intention. Jalen wasn't there, but she thought of him when she said her vows, not because she loved him, but because part of her healing had his fingerprints. And just like that, Elena Bradford became Elena Ward. A new chapter began, one where trust would be tested, not once, but many times. One where peace would seem within reach, only to vanish again. Because love built on broken ground is never easy to hold. And sometimes, the past you thought was buried comes back in a form you never expected. At first glance, everything looked right. From the outside, Michael and Elena had finally become what everyone expected of them years ago. The couple who made it. The apartment was modest but warm. Sunlight spilled through lace curtains each morning. Framed photos lined the hallway. College graduation, their garden wedding, goofy Polaroids from late-night grocery runs. Elena was now a full-time nurse at Crest Hill Pediatric Center. Michael was working with a firm that specialized in sustainable housing. Their lives were busy, productive, forward-moving. And yet, something was missing. Something you couldn't name until it was gone. It started with the silence. Not the kind that comes after a fight, but the kind that slips in during dinner. When the TV hums louder than the conversation. When, "How was your day?" turns into a shrug, and "I'm just tired" becomes the default reply. Michael was doing everything right. That was the strangest part. He cooked dinner, picked up dry cleaning, left sticky notes on the mirror that read, "You're amazing. Don't forget it." He kissed her goodbye every morning. He never raised his voice. He bought her favorite wine on Fridays and rubbed her back when she had cramps. He was perfect. Too perfect. And that's when it hit her. Michael wasn't showing up because he wanted to. He was showing up because he needed to, like a man trying to outrun a past he couldn't erase, by overcompensating in the present. And Elena, she appreciated the gestures, but she couldn't feel them. They didn't land. They felt scripted. Like he was performing the idea of a good husband rather than being one. She never told him this. She didn't want to seem ungrateful, didn't want to be that wife, the one who complains even when things seem good. But at night, when the lights were off and Michael's breathing slowed beside her, Elena lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering when her heart had quietly stepped back from the man she once said yes to. At work, she found escape. The clinic was chaotic, yes, but it was real. Crying babies, exhausted parents. The nurses joked to stay sane. The doctors barked orders. But amidst the madness, Elena felt alive. There, she didn't need to perform. She just had to show up. And one person who always noticed when she did was Cameron Ellis. Cameron was a new administrative lead, fresh from Denver, sharp-witted, funny, with a kindness that wasn't loud, just consistent. He wasn't flirty. He didn't cross lines. But he saw her. When Elena skipped lunch to cover extra patience, he slipped her a granola bar and said, "Surgeon snack, you'll survive." When she was late leaving, he walked her to her car, talking about everything from climate change to jazz music. She never told Michael about Cameron, not because she was hiding something, but because she didn't know what it was yet. But deep inside, a question lingered. Why did she feel more noticed in a 10-minute hallway conversation than she had in months of marriage? At home, Michael was still trying. But now there was an edge. He started asking subtle questions. Who were you texting? Clinic always keep you this late? They never turned into arguments. Michael hated confrontation. But Elena could feel the pressure building, like a teapot right before the whistle. One night, while washing dishes, she said casually, "Cam, one of our admins, told me the cutest story about his niece today." Michael didn't look up from the sink. "Oh yeah? You two talk a lot?" His voice was calm, but too calm. Elena paused. "Not really. Just small talk." Michael didn't press. But the rest of the night, he was quieter than usual. Later, when she came out of the shower, she found her phone placed face down on the nightstand. She hadn't left it that way. She didn't say anything, but the silence between them that night was louder than words. As the weeks went by, the emotional distance grew. They still laughed. Sometimes. They still held hands in public. But behind closed doors, something had shifted. Michael had become obsessed with being enough, fixing every problem before it surfaced, preempting disappointment. And Elena? She had become an expert at pretending to be grateful, pretending not to feel empty, pretending that the man in front of her was still the one she wanted to build a life with. Then came the night she found him in the guest room. She came home late from a night shift, exhausted, cold, walked into the bedroom to find the sheets untouched. She found him asleep on the guest bed, fully clothed. His phone open, clutched in his hand. A text thread with a contact named G. Short, casual messages. Nothing explicit, but familiar. She didn't wake him. She just stood there, in the dark, and watched him breathe. In that moment, she didn't feel betrayed. She felt numb, like something inside her had quietly accepted the truth. You can only outrun guilt for so long. Eventually, it catches its breath. The next morning, Michael apologized before she even asked. "I fell asleep in there because I didn't want to wake you. You've been working so hard. I wanted you to rest." She nodded. Didn't ask about the messages. Didn't want to hear the rehearsed answers. They ate breakfast in silence. He made her coffee the way she liked it. She thanked him without tasting it. Weeks later, Elena took a walk alone by the river. She watched the water move. Calm, steady, unbothered. She wondered when she'd last felt like that. She pulled out her phone, scrolled through her gallery. Photos of her and Michael. Smiling, hugging, kissing. She stared at one from their honeymoon. Sunset, wind in her hair, him grinning like he'd won the lottery. And she realized she couldn't remember what that moment felt like. The photo was real. But the connection? Gone. Love, she thought, doesn't always die in storms. Sometimes it disappears in stillness. Elena didn't cry when the doctor said the word triplets. She laughed. Not because it was funny, but because somehow, after everything, love, betrayal, rebuilding, her body had decided to surprise her in the loudest possible way. 3 heartbeats. 3 tiny flickers on the screen, 3 lives growing inside her. Michael held her hand, his eyes wide, his mouth somewhere between awe and horror. 3, he whispered. Elena squeezed his fingers. 3! He blinked, then laughed, then kissed her knuckles. Guess we're overachievers. The months that followed were a whirlwind of ultrasounds, swelling ankles, baby name arguments, and late-night back rubs. Michael stepped up in every way, painted the nursery, took prenatal classes, made her smoothies, read parenting blogs out loud at 1 a.m. For a moment, she let herself believe, this time, they were ready. That maybe all the cracks from before had healed over. That maybe love was finally solid. The babies came early, 7 weeks ahead of schedule. Labor was fast, too fast. A blur of sterile lights, blood pressure monitors, screams, and oxygen masks. Elena remembers being wheeled into the delivery room. The blur of nurses, the panic in Michael's voice. And then, silence. Then one soft cry. Then another, then a third, weak but real. She was too exhausted to sit up, but the nurse leaned over her and whispered, "You did it. They're healthy. They're here." She smiled through her tears, mouthing 3 names they'd picked weeks ago. Noah, Ezra, Judah. But when Michael walked into the room, the joy shattered. He froze in the doorway, eyes wide, expression unreadable. Elena reached for him, her fingers trembling. "They're perfect, aren't they?" she whispered. But he didn't answer. He just walked slowly toward the cribs, looked down. And then his body stiffened. "What?" His voice cracked. "Elena, what?" "What?" He turned slowly, face pale, jaw tight. "Their skin," he said. They're dark." It didn't register at first. Then she looked again. Really looked. The boys were beautiful, small, squirming, swaddled tight. But yes, there was no denying it. Their skin was several shades darker than hers, or Michael's. Not deep brown, but clearly biracial. And suddenly, the air in the room felt suffocating. "Michael," she said, trying to sit up, "you know I'd never—" But he stepped back, like her voice burned him. "I'm not saying anything, I just—" He looked at the babies again, then at her. And in his eyes, she saw something worse than anger. Suspicion. "Elena," he said almost gently, "just tell me, if there's something I should know." Her heart twisted. "You think I cheated on you?" Tears welled up. "Are you serious?" "I don't know what to think," he said, voice rising. "You're the one who's been distant for months. You stay late at the clinic. You—" "Michael, no," she said, a sob escaping. "These are your children." He said nothing. And in his silence, 1,000 knives. Things spiraled fast after that. Michael didn't stay the night at the hospital. He said he needed time to process. His mother came the next morning, walked in, took one look at the babies, and her lips pressed into a thin, disapproving line. "Elena," she said coolly, "I think we need to talk." There was no congratulations. No, they're beautiful. Just judgment, masked in politeness, laced with venom. Elena tried to stay calm, tried to explain, but every word felt like it bounced off a wall already built around their ears. By the time she returned home, babies in tow, still aching from surgery and sleep-deprived. Michael was cold, distant, polite but robotic. He fed the babies without smiling. He helped with diaper changes but never kissed their heads. He stared at them sometimes, like trying to solve a riddle he didn't trust. And worse, he stopped touching Elena altogether. No hugs, no kisses, no hand on her back while she washed bottles at 3 a.m. Just silence. And then the whispers started. His father, his cousin, his co-workers. Elena overheard it all. "They don't look like Michael. You think she stepped out on him? Maybe she thought he wouldn't notice." The shame clawed at her. Not because she'd done anything wrong, but because no one would believe she hadn't. One night, she walked in on Michael staring at a paternity test website. He didn't close the tab. He just looked up and said, "It's not about blame, Elena. It's about truth." And something inside her snapped. "Truth?" she whispered. "I carried these babies for 7 months. I tore my body apart to bring them into the world. And the second they didn't look the way you expected, you threw us all under suspicion." Michael stood. "You know this isn't about skin color." "Isn't it?" she snapped, tears streaming. "Would you be acting like this if they were pale and blonde? Would your mother be side-eyeing them like they're strangers if they had your freckles?" He didn't answer. He didn't have to. Soon after, his mother invited them over for dinner. Elena didn't want to go, but Michael insisted. "We need to show we're united," he said. But the word we felt hollow. The night was stiff. Tension hung in the air like smoke. The babies fussed. Elena fed them quietly while Michael's mother served roast chicken and side glances. At one point, she leaned in close to Michael and whispered, just loud enough for Elena to hear, "You deserve certainty. A man shouldn't live with doubt." Elena's hand clenched around her glass so hard it nearly shattered. She stood up, her voice trembling. "If you have something to say, say it." Michael's mother turned to her, face tight. "I just think, if there's any question about the children's parentage, you should welcome clarity. Don't you want that peace of mind too, Elena?" Elena stared at her, then at Michael. He didn't say a word, didn't defend her, didn't push back, just looked down at his plate. And in that moment, Elena knew. She was alone. That night, she sat in the nursery rocking Noah in the dim light. The room was quiet, save for the soft creak of the chair and the baby's sleepy breathing. Tears slipped down her cheeks and onto his onesie. She didn't sob, didn't scream. She just sat there, holding her son, wondering how something so beautiful could come into a world that already questioned his right to belong. By morning, she made her decision. She packed 2 bags, diapers, bottles, onesies, formula, letters, birth certificates. She kissed each baby gently, strapped them into their car seats, and with shaking hands, she wrote one final note. "You never believed in me, but I believe in them." She left it on the kitchen table. Then she drove away. Away from the man who once promised forever. Away from the house that now felt like a courtroom. Away from judgment, toward a new kind of unknown. But at least this time, she'd have her truth. And 3 tiny hearts who trusted her with everything. The road out of town was quiet at 5:37 a.m. A low fog hugged the asphalt, and the world felt wrapped in cotton. Elena didn't blast music. She didn't cry. She just drove, hands tight around the steering wheel, eyes shifting between the curve of the road and the soft sighs of her sleeping babies in the back seat. Noah, Ezra, and Judah. Their names echoed in her chest like prayers. For the first time since the delivery, she felt still, not healed, not free, just still. She arrived at her grandparents' farmhouse just after noon. The house sat on a gentle hill outside Waverly, Oregon, a place where time felt slower, where wind chimes told the weather before the forecast did, where the porch creaked when you stepped on the 3rd plank, where home didn't need to be explained. It just was. She hadn't called ahead, hadn't warned them, hadn't even packed properly, but when she stepped out of the car with 3 babies and tear-worn eyes, her grandmother didn't ask a single question. She simply opened her arms and said, "Come in, baby girl, come in." Elena collapsed into her embrace, a mix of exhaustion and grief and relief washing over her like waves. Her grandfather, quiet as always, stepped forward and gently took one of the carriers. "Let's get these little warriors inside," he said, his voice gravel and honey. No judgment, no suspicion, just love. The kind that doesn't flinch when you're broken. The kind that doesn't ask why you left, only if you're hungry. They settled her into the old guest room, the one with yellow curtains and the quilt her grandmother stitched during the Clinton years. Each baby had a makeshift bassinet by the wall. Her grandmother brewed mint tea and made soup from scratch before Elena even finished nursing Judah. "You can stay as long as you need," she said, placing a hand on Elena's shoulder. "We'll figure the rest out later." And for the first time in weeks, Elena exhaled without shaking. The days that followed blurred into softness. Her grandmother showed her how to massage the babies' bellies when they fussed. Her grandfather sang old gospel hymns while rocking them by the window. There were no awkward questions, no suspicious looks at their skin tone. Only 3 babies who were loved without hesitation, without qualifiers. And Elena? She slept. Not long, not deeply, but enough. Enough to begin stitching herself back together. One morning, as dew still clung to the porch railing, her grandfather sat beside her with a mug of coffee and a folded piece of paper. "Your mother," he said, handing her the note, "left this in the attic. It's for you." Elena blinked. She hadn't spoken about her mother in months. She unfolded the paper carefully. It was a letter, written before her mother passed away from cancer 2 years earlier. In looping cursive, it read, Sweet Elena, I know the world will be unfair to you sometimes. I know people will judge you for things they don't understand, but I want you to remember this. Truth needs no defense. It just needs time. Love needs no explanation. It just needs courage. And you, my darling girl, have both. Keep going, even when it's dark. Elena pressed the letter to her heart, closed her eyes. Her mother was gone, but somehow, still here, still reminding her to trust the truth she knew inside herself. Evenings on the farm were slow, healing. They'd sit on the porch and watch the babies sleep. Her grandmother hummed as she knitted tiny socks. Her grandfather rocked Ezra with one foot while sipping lemonade. And somewhere between the sound of cicadas and the scent of fresh bread, Elena began to feel human again. Not perfect, not whole, but real. One night, lightning flickered far off in the hills. The babies stirred, restless. Elena paced the room with Judah, bouncing gently, whispering lullabies. And suddenly, out of nowhere, she cried. Not because she was in pain, but because for the first time in weeks, she wasn't. Because safety, when you've been in survival mode, feels almost violent in its gentleness. She held Judah tighter, tears soaking his soft blanket. "You're safe now," she whispered. "I promise I won't let them make you question who you are, ever." It was a vow, not just to him, but to herself. The next morning, while folding laundry, her grandmother said quietly, "You know, we've got family in Louisiana with darker skin than sugarcane soil." Elena looked up, startled. She hadn't told them what happened. Not in full, just fragments, enough to explain the bags, the tears, the silence. Her grandmother gave her a knowing smile. "Families are complicated, sweetheart. Sometimes color skips generations. Sometimes secrets hide in bloodlines. But love?" She reached over, brushing a stray curl from Noah's forehead. "Love doesn't care what color your babies are, and neither do we." It was the kind of affirmation Elena didn't even realize she needed. Not until it wrapped around her like sunlight. She'd been blamed, judged, called a liar, silently condemned by people who never asked, "How are you?" Only, "What did you do?" But here, in this old farmhouse with peeling paint and too many clocks, she was simply seen. And slowly, gently, she started believing in herself again. Not because the pain disappeared, but because someone loved her through it. One afternoon, while hanging onesies on the clothesline, she caught her own reflection in the window pane. Hair messy, shirt stained, eyes tired. But there was something else, something fierce, something unbreakable. Elena had lost a husband, lost a version of herself, lost the illusion of safety in the arms of a man she once trusted. But in return, she'd found something deeper, a truth that needed no test results, a strength born from sorrow, a love that wouldn't shrink in the face of doubt, and 3 little boys who looked up at her with eyes full of trust, as if to say, "We know who you are, and that's enough." 2 months had passed since she left. Elena hadn't heard from Michael, not once. No texts, no calls, no "I'm sorry," no "I miss you," not even a question about the babies. Only silence. And that silence had settled into her bones. But her father, Warren, couldn't bear it anymore. He had been quiet when she arrived, steady, supportive. But every day, he watched her carry 3 infants with exhausted arms and eyes that hadn't known peace in weeks. He watched her pretend to be strong, and it tore him apart. So one Friday morning after breakfast, he said softly, "I'm going to see him." Elena looked up from folding baby blankets. "Who?" He didn't blink. "Michael." She froze. Her throat tightened. "No, Dad, please don't. It's not worth it." Warren stood tall, the way fathers do when they know their daughters have been wounded too deeply. "I just need him to understand what he's done, that these boys, your boys, deserve a father who doesn't flinch when he looks at them." Elena stepped forward, put her hand on his chest. "Don't waste your strength on someone who used mine up." But he kissed her forehead and walked out the door. She waited by the window for 3 hours. No call, no text. Then her grandmother's phone rang. Elena knew before the first word was spoken. The hospital. Warren. Cardiac event. Emergency bypass. Her world went silent. They rushed to Crest Hill Memorial, the very hospital where she once trained. The same hallways, the same antiseptic smell. Only this time, she wasn't a nurse. She was a daughter trying not to collapse. In the ICU, machines beeped steadily beside her father's bed. He lay there, pale and still, tubes in his nose, lines running from his arms. Her strong, steady father. Broken. Because of a man who couldn't see past the color of his own children's skin. Michael never came to the hospital. Not the first day, not the second. Not even when her grandmother left a voicemail that simply said, "He may not make it. If you have a conscience, show it." He never called back. Warren made it through the surgery, but not unchanged. The doctors said he'd suffered a mild stroke mid-operation. His speech became halting, his gait unsteady. The man who once lifted her onto his shoulders now needed help walking to the porch. And Elena, she couldn't look at him without feeling the weight of it. "This is my fault," she whispered it to herself every night. "If I had just walked away sooner, if I hadn't tried so hard to prove I was right, if I hadn't needed Michael to see me, maybe Dad wouldn't have paid the price." Guilt dug its claws in deep. The kind of guilt that doesn't scream, just waits in the quiet, like a shadow. That weekend, she made a decision. Not out of rage, not out of hurt, but out of something colder. Clarity. She called a lawyer in Portland, asked about custody, asked about property, asked about how fast they could end it. He said, "With 3 children and no contest, 90 days, maybe 60 if he doesn't fight." Elena laughed. Not because it was funny, because she knew Michael wouldn't fight. He hadn't fought for anything since the moment their children took their first breath. She served him the papers by mail. 2 weeks later, she got a single envelope in return. No note, no apology, just a signed signature. And a wedding band had taped to the bottom corner of the page. A quiet goodbye. The official divorce came on a rainy Wednesday. No courtroom, no arguments. Just a court clerk's stamp and a final line that read, "Marriage dissolved in accordance with Oregon Family Law Code, Section 107.105. Elena read it in the kitchen while Noah gnawed on a teether and Judah drooled into her lap. And then she cried. Not because she missed him, but because endings always hurt, even when they're the right ones. That night she sat with her father on the porch. He had a blanket over his knees. She handed him a cup of tea and tucked it into his palms. "I'm sorry," she whispered. He looked at her, blinking slowly, then touched her hand with his shaking fingers. "You, strong." 2 words, 2 fractured syllables, but more powerful than any speech. She pressed her forehead to his shoulder and let the guilt finally go. The next morning, she burned the old photos. Not in rage, but in ritual. Her wedding picture, the ultrasound they framed together, the birthday card he gave her that said forever. Ashes fell into the metal bin. Smoke drifted into the early light. And with each flicker of flame, she felt something uncoil in her chest. Not closure, but space. Space for something new. There are kinds of pain that tear you down, and kinds of pain that carve you out so you can hold more. Elena had lost so much, but sitting at the edge of that grief was something sacred. Her babies, their laughter, their tiny hands reaching for her face. The way Ezra squealed when she kissed his belly. The way Judah grunted when she rocked him too fast. The way Noah clung to her shirt like it was a lifeline. They chose her, and they were enough, more than enough. Life moved slowly in the months after the divorce. Not stagnant, just still, like a field resting after the storm. Elena had settled into a rhythm. Feedings, diaper changes, pediatric checkups. She found new joy in the tiny victories. Ezra holding his bottle on his own. Noah babbling, "Mama," half-formed through drool. Judah giggling when she made silly faces during bath time. It wasn't glamorous, but it was theirs, and it was finally hers alone. She began working part-time at a local clinic in Waverly, just a few hours a week, enough to feel useful, alive, like a nurse again. Her grandmother watched the boys. Her grandfather sang lullabies that no longer needed words. Healing didn't come in a flood. It arrived in drops, in warm socks, in late-night rocking chairs, in the quiet moments when no one needed her to prove herself. Then, one Tuesday morning, just as spring touched the edges of the orchard, the phone rang. Her grandmother answered, listened, then turned, her face pale. "It's Margaret," she said. Elena blinked. "Michael's mother?" Her grandmother nodded. "She's in hospice, stage 4 pancreatic. Said she wants to see you." Elena's stomach clenched. "I'm not going. She asked for the boys too." Elena froze. That name, that woman, the same woman who stared at her children like they were someone else's, who whispered doubt into Michael's ears like poison, who helped unravel her entire life with a single look. But then, something in her stirred. Not forgiveness, not sympathy, but curiosity. Why now? Why them? She arrived at the facility 2 days later, not dressed in revenge or pride, but in calm. She carried Judah on her hip, pushed Ezra and Noah in a second-hand stroller, and walked down the sterile hallway like a soldier returning from war, scarred but upright. Room 204. She knocked once, then stepped inside. Margaret Ward was unrecognizable. Thinner, pale, eyes sunken into a face that once held so much power. She looked at Elena, then at the boys. Then she cried, softly, helplessly. "I don't deserve this," she whispered, "but I asked for it anyway." Elena said nothing, just stood there, mother, protector, survivor. Margaret gestured weakly toward a chair. "Please." Elena sat. The room buzzed with silence for a long moment. Then Margaret spoke. "I lied," she said. Elena's breath caught. Margaret continued, her voice trembling. "I knew they were Michael's. I knew it the moment I saw them." Elena's heart pounded. "What are you talking about?" Margaret looked toward the ceiling. "My husband, Robert, he had an affair, years ago, with a woman he worked with. Her name was Delilah. She was black." Elena leaned forward slowly. Margaret's eyes shimmered. "She got pregnant. She gave birth to a boy, but he didn't raise him. He cut her off, paid her to stay away. That boy was placed with a relative, never legally claimed. But I knew." She coughed, weak and wet. Elena stood instinctively, grabbing a tissue, pressing it into her hand. Margaret's fingers shook. "I made him swear never to tell Michael. We agreed. Our son didn't need to know. It would complicate everything, his future, his image, his place." Elena sat down slowly. "You're saying," her voice cracked, "Michael's biracial?" Margaret nodded. "Quarter black, maybe more. It doesn't show in him, but it's there. It's in his blood, his DNA." Elena's lips parted. Everything clicked. The triplets, their skin tone, their curls, their warmth. They weren't proof of betrayal. They were proof of history, of heritage, of truth buried so deep, even Michael didn't know he was denying his own reflection. Margaret's voice broke again. "I let you be crucified to protect a lie I no longer believe in, and now I'm dying, and you deserve to know." Elena didn't cry. She didn't scream. She just held Judah closer to her chest and whispered, "You destroyed a family to protect an illusion." Margaret nodded, her eyes heavy with shame. "I know." Then she looked at the babies, her grandsons. "I don't deserve their forgiveness." Elena stood. "No," she said. "You don't." She turned to leave, heart pounding, blood roaring in her ears. But just before she reached the door, Margaret said quietly, "Thank you for raising them anyway." Outside, Elena stood in the parking lot holding the boys against her. The wind swept through her hair. She closed her eyes. She was right all along. They were never a mistake. They were never a mystery. They were the truth. A truth denied for decades. A truth she carried through labor, through judgment, through silence. And now, a truth finally spoken. That night, after the boys were asleep, she sat on the porch with her grandmother, told her everything. Her grandmother said nothing for a long time, just stared into the distance, Then, softly, "You know what your mama used to say? Secrets are heavy, but lies are the things that kill love before it's born." Elena nodded, and for the first time in what felt like years, she felt light. The next morning she wrote a letter. To Michael. "Michael, your mother told me everything. About your father, about the past, about who you really are. Our children didn't ruin us. Your silence did. But I'm done asking you to believe in them, or in me. I just wanted you to know. The truth was always right in front of you. You just refused to see it. Elena." She didn't mail it. She just folded it neatly, placed it in a box with her old wedding band, and stored it in the attic. Not for him, for the boys. Someday, when they'd be old enough to ask, and strong enough to understand. It had been nearly 8 months since Elena last saw Michael. 8 months since the delivery room. Since the accusations. Since the silence that broke more than just their marriage. She thought that was the end. Until one crisp October afternoon, her grandmother appeared at the door, holding a folded piece of paper. "He dropped this off," she said simply. Elena took it. Her name, handwritten. No envelope, no return address. She unfolded it slowly. "I know now. About my father. About the truth. About them. I've spent the last few months trying to unlearn what I was raised to believe. It's not enough, I know that. But if it's possible, I'd like to meet my sons. No expectations, just a chance. I'll be at Pine Creek Park, Sunday, 4 p.m. If you don't come, I'll understand." Elena stared at the note for a long time. She didn't feel anger. She didn't feel pity. Just a question pulsing in her mind. Were they ready? Sunday arrived too fast. She dressed the boys gently, combed Ezra's curls, wiped Noah's cheeks, snapped Judah's overalls. They didn't know who they were about to meet. To them, it was a walk in the park, a sunny day, ducks by the pond, snacks in a baggie. To her, it was a confrontation with the past, a test she didn't need to pass, just endure. She arrived at 4:06. He was already there, sitting on a bench, looking smaller than she remembered. Michael stood when he saw them, hands twitching nervously by his sides. He didn't step forward, he just waited. She approached slowly. The boys ran ahead, giggling, chasing each other in crooked lines. Michael's eyes followed them. "They're beautiful," he said quietly. Elena nodded. "They're mine." It wasn't a correction. It was a truth. He nodded. "I know." A beat passed, then another. "Thank you for coming," he added. "I didn't come for you," she said, her voice steady. "I came for them." He swallowed. "May I sit with them?" She hesitated, then nodded once. "They don't know who you are," she warned. "I know." He crouched as Noah toddled past, holding a stick like a sword. "Hey, buddy," Michael said gently. "Nice sword." Noah looked up, squinted, then, with toddler curiosity, handed him the stick. Michael took it like it was fragile glass. Ezra came next, then Judah. Soon, they were circling him, laughing, babbling, tossing leaves. And Michael just sat there, letting them climb him, letting them touch his face, letting them see him. He didn't correct them when they called him the Leaf Man. Didn't try to explain who he was. He just played. For 20 minutes, Elena stood back and watched. Her heart ached, not with regret, but with mourning. For what could have been. For the first smiles he missed. For the nights she cried alone while he was too proud to pick up the phone. Later, as the sun began to dip and the boys tired, Michael walked up slowly. He carried Ezra in one arm, Judah dragging behind, and Noah curled in his other hand. "They're tired," he said softly. Elena nodded. "I know." He passed them to her, one by one, held on to the moment for a heartbeat too long, then let go. "I don't expect anything," he said. "Not a second chance. Not forgiveness. He looked down. "I just wanted to see who I walked away from." Elena's voice cracked. "You didn't just walk away from them, Michael. You walked away from me, from the woman who would have given you everything, I know, he whispered, and I hate myself for it every day. They stood in silence. Leaves rustled around their shoes. Birds chirped somewhere beyond the path. Then he said, "They should know me, someday. If you allow it, even just a little. I'll take whatever you give." She looked at him, really looked. He wasn't the same man, not entirely. There were shadows in his eyes now, wrinkles that guilt had carved, a softness in the way he looked at the boys. But trust? Trust wasn't something she could give back so easily. Not yet. She reached into her bag, pulled out a small Ziploc. Inside, photos. First birthdays, bath time, smiles missing teeth. She handed them to him. "Start here." Michael took them like sacred texts. Thank you." She nodded. "Don't thank me. Just be better." He looked at her. "I'll try." She turned to leave, calling the boys. Noah looked back at Michael and waved. "Bye, Leaf Man." Michael chuckled. "Bye, little knight." And as they walked away, Elena heard him whisper, more to himself than anyone else, "I'm so sorry." She didn't turn around, but her eyes shimmered, because in that park, under a fading sun, she saw the smallest glimmer of something she thought was gone. Hope. Not for them, not for what was lost, but for her boys. Because one day, when they asked, "Did Dad ever come back?" she could say, "Yes, not perfectly, not fully, but he came and he tried. And sometimes, that's enough." Winter came slowly to Waverly. First the winds shifted, then the trees wore frost like lace. And one morning, the orchard outside the farmhouse stood silent beneath a white sky, pregnant with snow. Elena wrapped Judah in a blanket, kissed Noah's forehead, and watched Ezra chase his own breath in the cold. Her boys were growing. Noah had a laugh that cracked through silence like thunder. Ezra asked, "Why?" every 10 minutes. Judah learned to say no with a kind of stubborn pride that made her both smile and sigh. She hadn't seen Michael again. Not yet. Not because she barred him, but because he understood now. He'd have to come correctly or not at all. And that was enough. She'd return to nursing part-time. The small clinic in Waverly needed hands, gentle ones, the kind that knew how to hold grief and joy in the same breath. Elena had become that kind of nurse. And every time she held a newborn, every time she comforted a scared mother or watched a father rock a child with quiet awe, she remembered her own story. Not with pain, but with power. She had survived it. It was a Thursday when she saw him again. Not Michael. Jalen. She hadn't said that name aloud in over a year. But there he was, across the courtroom hallway. Older, a little tired around the eyes. Still wearing that same soft expression. Still holding a coffee cup with 2 napkins around it, like always. She was testifying in a pediatric case. Abuse documentation, medical reporting. He was consulting on a child trauma protocol. Their paths crossed between sworn testimonies and overheard pain. "Elena?" he said, blinking. She turned slowly. "Jalen." Silence. Then a small smile. "You look taller," he said. She laughed. "You look more tired." He chuckled. "Comes with believing in broken systems." "Still do?" He sipped his coffee. "Some days." She nodded. Then he looked at her, really looked. "You okay?" Her throat tightened unexpectedly. "I'm getting there." That was enough. They got coffee. Once, then twice, then weekly. Not dates, just conversations. About work, about books, about the little victories they still believed in. Jalen never pried, never asked about Michael, never made it feel like a test. He just listened, and for the first time in years. Elena spoke about the triplets, the delivery room, the judgment, the lies, the truth that came too late. Jalen didn't interrupt. He just said one thing. "I never stopped rooting for you." Spring returned with quiet promises. Green leaves, fresh blooms. Laughter echoing from the backyard as 3 little boys learned to race each other barefoot. Jalen started joining them. At first, just as a friend. But soon, Uncle Jalen became a fixture. He read bedtime stories, helped build a play fort, learned which sippy cup belonged to which twin, which boy hated carrots and which one hoarded crayons. The boys loved him, naturally, effortlessly. And Elena? She tried not to, tried to keep it slow, tried to protect what remained of her heart. But love doesn't always ask for permission. Sometimes it arrives like spring rain, soft, unstoppable, healing. One evening after dinner, they sat on the porch. The boys were asleep. Fireflies blinked across the yard. The sky wore 1,000 stars. Jalen held his coffee, then looked at her. "I'm not trying to replace anyone." She looked back. "I know. I just want to be wherever you'll let me be." She nodded, and that was enough. They didn't rush into romance. It wasn't urgent, it wasn't dramatic. It was something deeper. Trust, rebuilt brick by brick. Not over candlelit dinners, but over spilled cereal bowls, late-night fevers, and preschool pickups. It was love born of presence, not promises. And that made it real. By the boy's 3rd birthday, they were a family. Unlabeled, untitled, but whole. One morning, Ezra crawled into Elena's lap and whispered, "Uncle Jalen loves us, huh?" She smiled. "Yes, baby, very much." He looked up. "Do you love him too?" She paused, then kissed his forehead. "Yeah, I really do." Ezra grinned and ran off. Question answered. Elena never remarried, not because she didn't believe in marriage, but because she didn't need paperwork to validate something that already lived, fully, in her house. Jalen never proposed, but every day, he chose her, and she chose him back. Not in ceremony, but in everything. In the way he stayed, in the way he listened, in the way he made the boys feel like miracles, not mysteries. One day, while cleaning the attic, Elena found the old wedding box, the letter to Michael, the band she once wore. She didn't cry, she just smiled sadly, closed the lid, and walked it to the fireplace. She watched it burn, not with hate, but with gratitude. Because without that chapter, she wouldn't be here, with her boys, with this peace, with this quiet, faithful kind of love. As the fire dimmed, Jalen walked in, holding a cup of tea. He handed it to her, then looked at the fireplace. "You good?" he asked. Elena looked at him, at the man who showed up not with grand gestures, but steady hands. She nodded. "I'm home." Because in the end, healing doesn't always look like going back. Sometimes it looks like choosing forward, step by step, day by day. And love? Real love? It doesn't demand perfection. It grows in the places we thought were ruined.